The Bob Murphy Show, episode 397.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Bob Murphy Show. We've got a crossover but with a twist. There's actually going to be a third person involved in this discussion, namely Dominic Scarcella, who is the author, you folks may remember, of Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen, Reflections on the Core Social Conflict Revealed by Jesus Christ's Way of the Cross. So that was back on Bob Murphy Show, episode 310, that I interviewed Dominic about his book. And so he reached out to Adam and me saying he has some thoughts on Holy Week, the upcoming week leading up to Easter Sunday, and we thought, yeah, that would be good fodder for a discussion, and so that's what you're about to hear. Hope you like it.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
I don't want to alarm you.
There's somebody else in the room with us.
Yeah, I don't want to alarm you, but we have an intruder. Please welcome to the show one Dominic Scarcella, who has been on both Bob's show before and on Heyman Nature before. So doubly welcome back, Dom.
Well, thank you. I promise I'm not a Fed.
That's what
Which is exactly what a Fed would say. So I realize there's a danger there.
We determine much later on in the evening when the party starts whether you're a Fed or not. We have our ways.
And we are going to have to inspect you for tattoos.
That's right. Tramp stamps only. So, Dominic, you approached us with an idea for a show that I thought was pretty interesting. So why don't you just jump right in and tell us what is the deal with this here Holy Week that we're going to be talking about?
Okay, it's the Christian Holy Week or Passion Week is coming up, and some of your listeners, viewers might be familiar with it if they are Christian or know some people who are. And the question might be, what's going on in Holy Week and what exactly are you remembering? In addition to, I guess, the normal things that you remember during religious services or in your own private prayer, Holy Week actually serves the purpose of delving into the history in greater detail. And I thought it would be fun for us to go through some of the history there, because there's not only political tension, there's also some economic issues involved in what happens leading up to Jesus being arrested and then persecuted. And there's some gamesmanship going on there as well. In fact, there's one guy who gets played like the gullible mark that he is, who has quite a role in the proceedings, as we'll find.
Just to clarify, I don't know if either of you actually explicitly said it, but Holy Week leads up to Easter Sunday.
Yes.
Right, just for people who are like, what are you guys talking about? Okay, so
yep. It leads right up to Easter Sunday. Yeah. So there's the celebrations leading up to what the Christians would celebrate in Easter, the Paschal weekend. Yes, the details of that week get celebrated in various forms by different denominations of Christians, both formally in worship services. And it's also a time of year where people just make more meditations and more reflections of their own on those kind of historical events, because it's a good time to remember things historically, and sometimes the rhythm of the seasons prompts us to do that.
Okay, so I mean, you had sent us a document here. Do you want us to feed you things and ask you to comment, or how do you want to proceed?
It's a good question. I mean, I could go over just a little bit of the obvious that I think I went through before. But even if you're not a Christian, I hope that people can see there's very human dynamics happening in these very public, sometimes tensions that happen when there's an upstart somewhere who's telling the well-entrenched people in charge that maybe they're not getting everything correct.
I just want to know, where the bunny comes into it and where he got his hands on those delicious chocolate eggs.
Right. I think those were a later development, but yes.
Well, one thing that maybe we can start with is that when Jesus enters Jerusalem, for that week when he's going to be, the crowds are going to be calling for him to be crucified, not that, many days in the future at that point. It's not like he just comes in at night sneaking in because the crowds are so against him. They hail him as the king and so forth, and Hosanna. And so can you just maybe explain, like, just to make sure people understand this contrast, and this week kind of encapsulates the human experience and what humans are capable of?
Sure. I think we saw a lot of this, unfortunately, during the COVID debacle, where the political messaging, and depending on who was saying it, was able to change vast numbers of people's minds very quickly, for no reason other than the crowd was doing it. And so I'm going to do it too. So Jesus enters Jerusalem about a week before all this stuff goes down, even within a week. And yeah, he shows up with some of his friends. I mean, they're not, showing up with the weapons and things to take over the place, but it's a group of people showing up to the area, which is not uncommon. The Passover feast for the Israelites is approaching as well. And Jerusalem, that can be sort of a pilgrimage holiday. So there would be people entering Jerusalem anyway. Jesus shows up, and people get word of it because he's been there for a little more than 2 years in and out of Jerusalem preaching. So it's not like he's totally new to people there. So people have had some time to form their opinions of him. And it's almost like, okay, this celebrity is showing up. And so people are excited that the celebrity's there. And I think that's a lot of the adulation that initially happens for Jesus, because as we find out in a few days, it's a very shallow adulation. It can apparently be turned very quickly, at the snap of a finger, or turning a dial somewhere, where other leaders get together and suddenly turn people on Jesus. It's like, none of the Democrats wanted to take the Trump vaccine until Trump was out of office, and suddenly it became, everybody take the Trump vaccine, that we won't call the Trump vaccine anymore. And it was amazing to watch people flip their opinions completely around when nothing else happened other than leaders were telling you it's okay now, and other leaders were perhaps shunned aside. So we can see this stuff happening now, and maybe people can make a connection and say, man, I just lived through something just like this.
Yeah, I think that's a function of our species.
Yeah,
we
right.
are very hierarchical, and part of what got us here is we trust people that are above us. I mean, for good or for ill, we're sort of hardwired. Forgive just a super naive question from the non-biblical guy here, but is it an element of this story that Jesus knows what's about to go down over the next week?
Yes, there
Yeah.
is. For Christians, yes. I mean, we believe that Jesus knows what's going to happen, and he does it anyway. And that's part for Christian believers. That's part of the mystery, as it unfolds, is that not only does God as man know that this is going to happen, but he goes through it, and at no point does he kind of weasel his way out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like he physically is beaten up pretty badly by the cops, and then he is executed the way that Romans execute undesirables in the territories that they occupy, in a very cruel manner. It's meant to be cruel. And there are all sorts of people taking advantage of Jesus's human nature, his human form, is his humanity. And although Jesus knows what they're going to do, he does not, in a sense, use it against them, nor does he weasel his way out of it. But yes, there's an element of courage to it too. It's easy to pass away and say, oh, well, he's God, so like, what does he have to fear? But as someone who has submitted to the human condition, it's almost worse, right? Like I don't know when bad things are going to happen to me, and I think that's better. because I would probably freak out all the time if I knew even if I knew like, an hour from now I'm going to stub my toe. For the next hour, I would be on pins and needles all the time, wondering where's my foot going and what else is there. Like you would almost rather not know these things.
That reminds me of the Stephen Wright joke.
Okay.
The other night, my wife sat up in bed and said, if you could know the exact time and nature of your death, would you want to know? I said, no, of course not. And she said, oh, then never mind. Also, Adam, just to circle back on your thing, I mean, famously, as they're going up to Jerusalem, Jesus tells his closest apostles that the Son of Man's going to go up and be crucified and so forth. And then Peter says to him, I forget the exact translation, but like, oh no, Lord, far be it, that will never happen. Like, meaning we won't let that happen. And then Jesus says to him, get behind me, Satan. Meaning, like, that's Satan talking through you, telling me that I shouldn't go up to Jerusalem and let myself be killed. Because Jesus, not only does he know what's going to happen, he understands the point of it, that this is the way we're going to save humanity. Whereas, to his apostle. So that's the thing. Even the people who thought he was the Messiah, they thought he was like a political liberator, like King David coming back or something, and was going to kick the Romans out. They didn't think, oh yeah, the Messiah is going to come and the Romans are going to brutally torture him and murder him, but then he's going to come back from the dead, and then we're going to be like, oh yeah, he's cool. Like, they didn't think that was going to happen. Like, no, he's going to liberate us. If he gets crucified, that means he lost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I got to forgive him for that. They're just going with the odds.
There's also there's also the element that when Jesus enters Jerusalem, there still might be some people expecting the military conquest. So he enters, and maybe some people are still expecting, Bob, what you just described as that kind of Messiah. And then after a few days, when it becomes apparent he's not doing that, people are like, oh, what a letdown.
Okay, so that could partly explain why the crowd may have, it'd be easier to flip them on him. That
sure. Like if we get deceived not because what happens is true or false, but because whether or not it meets with our expectations.
Yeah.
Like, people can be deceived by truth. This goes to the whole question in Christianity, like, can God deceive us? And the question is, well, the better question is, can you be deceived by God? And the answer, of course, is yes. If God reveals truth to you, but you're expecting something else, then you will be deceived. But that's not the divine's fault. That's on you for jumping the gun on expectations and then not course correcting quickly enough when the reality, the evidence of reality, is presented to you. So that's another hard thing that for us humans is, to have a sense of the future. You have some expectations, but then you have to adjust when your expectations don't turn out to be correct, without feeling like, you've been offended or you've been wronged somehow. Maybe your expectations were just incorrect or naive.
Yeah, I don't want to sidetrack us on this point, but just to plant a seed, because I talk about this a lot on Human Nature, and Bob and I do too. The way you view the world, your framework, literally affects what it is that you see.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if God were trying to show you something, depending on the way you looked at the world, you might not understand what you're seeing or missee it or think it's evidence of a completely different thing. And so the way you're wired really affects deeply how you're going to perceive the world and understand it.
And even tying that to, the topic at hand, I mean, again, with all this stuff, folks, we're stipulating that even if you want to just look at it as literature, like, okay, we're discussing the literature that we call the New Testament here, the gospel accounts, if you want to do it that way. But like the Pharisees and like when the religious authorities are trying to set a trap for him earlier, and they bring somebody like with a withered hand on the Sabbath and say, oh, let's trap him because he's going to heal this guy miraculously. And then we're going to say, aha, you did work. And I'll say, can you imagine, like, you think somebody in the group would stop and say, wait a minute, guys, we're trying to catch him by knowing he's going to miraculously heal this guy's hand, and that's how we're going to do a gotcha. Like, shouldn't that kind of jump out at us as something screwy is going on here? And we're not the good guys in this scenario, but
it's an argument that would land if it's David Blaine, but maybe not Jesus.
Right.
So in your document, then you go on to say, like, you want to talk about the so-called cleansing of the temple. Like, that's a big event that happens that a few of the accounts talk about. So how do you want to discuss that?
Sure. The cleansing of the temple, three of the Gospels record this as Jesus enters Jerusalem. There's four Gospels in the Bible, Gospel according to Matthew, according to Mark, according to Luke, and according to John. And the first three mentioned are very, very similar in their structure. And so they do a lot of the what happens in the week leading up to Jesus's final supper with his closest friends and then his persecution. John's, on the other hand, does not do a lot on what happens during that week, but he does tons of stuff on what happens at that final get-together with Jesus and his apostles, and then extra what happens with his trial and everything that follows. So the first three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, talk about the cleansing of the temple. So basically, Jesus enters the temple area and drives out all those engaged in selling and buying there. And there's some accounts that say, well, he used the whip, so was Jesus whipping people? And the answer is no. If you understand what's happening in the temple, he doesn't have to. All he has to do is cause enough of a disturbance. So what's happening in the temple is this is where people go to offer their sacrifices. And of course, there's all sorts of, in a sense, unfunded mandates on individuals in the Hebrew culture as it develops. And so people are constantly in the temple offering sacrifice. And sacrifice for them is typically a burnt offering or an atonement offering. And it's an animal that is presented. It's supposed to be a blameless animal, so no blemishes. You can't bring in a turtle dove with a broken wing or a lamb with a blemish somewhere. And naturally, if you showed up, and especially if you're a poor person, you would have to purchase your sacrificial animals from the temple there. If you were a rich enough person and had you were well connected, you could bring in your own lamb, and somebody would say, "Oh yes, he's fine, he can go." But I mean, if you're a poor person, I mean, you don't have your own flock of turtle doves and pigeons that you keep and would be bringing one in with you. So you go into the temple, you have to purchase some of these animals here in order to stay on the good side of the citizenship here. And so whether it's lambs, smaller animals, pigeons and turtle doves, smaller birds, all Jesus has to do is get a whip and crack it and startle the animals. And then once the animals startle, the humans, oh my goodness, they freak out. A little bit of chaos here. Now the humans get up and they're trying to corral the animals, and now Jesus at the empty tables can toss them over and make the big scene when everybody gets themselves back together. So that's one thing, the notion that there's something unseemly about the way these payment sacrifices are handled. And this is the kind of thing that Jesus's family would have went through when he was an infant. The Gospel of Luke records his parents, Joseph and Mary, bringing him to the temple to offer the sacrifice that was necessary for a woman who gave birth to a son. And of course, Joseph and Mary being poor, they have to offer the two turtle doves rather than a lamb and a turtle dove. And you can just imagine showing up and somebody saying, you're like you're at the DMV. Okay, one lamb, one turtle dove, move on over to the next window. And Joseph having to say, we can't afford that. What do you mean you can't afford that? I'm sorry. We can't afford that. All right, two turtle doves, next window, and just being looked down upon because now you're visibly poor. Like, you bring your poor person's sacrifice up there. So there's something unseemly about what sacrifice has come to represent. It has come to represent status. It's come to represent sort of an empty ritual.
So what's the grift here? What would happen to them if they just walked right past that window and didn't give anything? Would it be
low
social?
standing in society. Yeah, it's the law. This goes back to some of these sacrifices are mentioned explicitly in the Hebrew literature.
I mean, would you be thrown in jail or kept out of certain buildings, or just scorn heaped upon you, or?
Scorn heaped upon you. Sometimes there are stiffer penalties depending on which laws you break. But even in a very close-knit society, the scorn of your fellows who may not do business with you anymore, who may not want to be seen with you anymore, lest their status be decreased in other people's eyes. I mean,
Gotcha.
living in a enormous culture like we live in, you can there's always that romantic idea that, oh, I can just pick up and move to a new town. Like, this town is just too small. How many country songs are written about people like, I just got to leave this town, it's too small. That's not as easy for people back then. I mean, your community and the people you live with, you need to be in their good graces, because life is a lot tougher if you're not. There's not as many options for you. So there's tons of social pressure. Yes, on these people.
My guess too on that, again, not that I was there and know this, but my guess would be, Adam, if you knew you weren't going to pay, you just wouldn't go, right? Because this is like throngs of people going to Jerusalem for the Holy Week to go make the religiously demanded sacrifices. So if you looked ahead and said, you know what, I'm not paying, they just, that's it. Like, the idea is kind of that I've heard other people say, because a lot of left-wing Christian types, or people who aren't even Christian but just trying to appeal to, will point to this and say, see, commerce is icky. And Jesus himself, said, you made my father's house into a den of thieves. And so he doesn't like commerce. And I've heard a lot of, admittedly, like sort of right-wing conservative preacher types saying, no, it wasn't the sacrifices or the fact that, like, not just poor people, but like people traveling from a long way away, they couldn't take the animals with them on the journey. That would be crazy. And so they would just come with money and then buy the animals, outside the thing, and then go in and have it. And so the point is, it's like, man, I went to Disney World and like a Coke was $8. That's crazy. That's that kind of an idea. You get what I'm saying, Adam? So if it was like your religion demanded that you go in and go pay homage to Snow White's castle with a Coke, and they charge you $30 for it, then they're like gouging you. Like, that's kind of the idea, that it's religiously demanded, and yet they're, quote, profiteering on people who have to travel from a long way away to come to Jerusalem.
Yeah, that helps. I think I get it. And am I correct in assuming then that they're not going to be charged this in some other town? It's because they're going to the Super Bowl or Disneyland or whatever?
If you're making a temple sacrifice, there's something special about that you wouldn't.
And that's only in one spot.
Yeah, you've got to go there. There's also the idea of money changers, because, Bob, as you were mentioning, the Hebrew people have been what's called diaspora for centuries, meaning they've been living outside of Jerusalem because of various political skirmishes, wars, conquests, being driven out. So as travelers come into Jerusalem from farther away, they're using different money. And so the money changers are there to, make sure you have the correct coinage for your temple sacrifice. And, as happens with money changing, you give people one rate coming in and another rate going out the door when they try to redeem for their other currency on the way out. So there's a little grift going on. Anytime there are middlemen who have power and really no check above them, there's the opportunity for something corrupt.
And that's specifically like talking about the money changers. So thanks,
Yes.
Dominic, for reminding me that's really, the thing that Adam, like he's saying, it was like, if you got to pay the temple tax, they don't accept it in a certain form. And so people from abroad, a long ways over coming up and they have their own local money, they got to change it. And so the idea was that, yes, you were not getting the best exchange rate on those deals.
And inefficient, or not enough competition on the bid-ask spread for
right. So as an economist, I can't come in and tell you, was Jesus just talking about the market here's not efficient, or, was it commerce per se that was icky? But that's why, in case you guys have seen this, there are a lot of memes, saying things like, keep in mind that when people say, what would Jesus do? One possible answer is driving the money changers out of the temple. You know what I mean? Like for people who are anti-Fed or something, or in other less fun cases, people who are anti the type of people who are running the temple. But I will move on from that topic.
Good call, Bob. Good call.
Okay, so how do you want to connect that, Dominic? Did you want to connect like, what happened historically and in the gospel accounts now with like, well, how do we apply that in our day?
We could do that. I mean, in our day, currency changing, we don't see as much of it in the U.S. because the U.S. petrodollar is sort of the dominant currency. It's most of the people in the world who want to do business related to the petrodollar, not us who constantly have to be using other currencies. So we may not see as much of that here, but I think your example, Bob, was a pretty good analogy of, when people know they have, when they've got the market cornered and they have people buying, But you could make the analogy to what happened with the Affordable Care Act and health insurance, where some people were stunned that health coverage got more expensive. Well, the government just guaranteed that everybody had to buy it.
Yeah.
So those insurers who were able to stay in business, obviously they now have a guaranteed customer base. So that happens a little here as well. Once you guarantee that people have to buy things and that there's only a very few limited people who can sell it in a particular place, this is rife for abuse.
Yep.
It's nothing resembling a free market, and it's corrupt. It's inviting corruption.
Cornering the market in turtle doves. It's an
Right.
age-old story.
Very much so. So the next few things that happen is after this. That's sort of maybe a purely financial and commerce corruption that's going on, driving the money changers out. This sort of sets off the religious leaders who are like, oh, this guy's back again, and now he's even worse. Like not only is it you again, but it's you again, and you haven't learned your lesson. The last time we chased you out of here, and you had to leave to the outskirts.
Because again, I mean, just from their point of view, imagine they're sitting there doing this thing, and this guy comes in who's been calling them vipers and stuff in his public, and then he comes in, drives the animals out, and flips tables, and money's going all over the place, like right, and a few days before the Passover, like who does this guy think he is? What is he doing? You could see why they would be enraged. I'm not defending what they did. I'm just saying, like this isn't just. I think I'm partly saying this because Dom, I don't know if you ever had this, but me growing up, for some reason, I had this idea that Jesus was like Ned Flanders. And it's just got the big glowing heart, and he's just, come here, little kids, and hug me. And it was like, yes, he was that, he is that, but also he flips tables and drives animals out and calls people a brood of vipers. So,
yes, there's and this happens in Christianity. Adam, I don't know if you've come across this as well, but when you grow up with something, in order to teach it to little kids, they kind of have to water it down so the little kids understand. So the only thing you learn, or the thing you most predominantly learn, is Jesus is a nice guy. Like, Jesus is wonderful and peaceful.
He's a shepherd.
Right,
he's got a lamb over his shoulders, and he's
right, yeah, he's got a lamb over each shoulder or whatever. He's just the nice guy. And then if you look more into the history and even just the gospel writings themselves, you realize, Jesus is kind, but he's not really a nice guy. Like, nice is when you do things to elicit favorable reactions from people. Right. Nice is someone else's opinion of you. Kind is more of, you treat a person a way that respects their dignity. So Jesus is not nice because he's not just seeking external validation. In fact, sometimes he does things that different people react to differently. So like, you can't please everybody. So Jesus is just trying to be as true as possible. And people react to him all sorts of ways, which reveals really their hearts. So yes, the more you learn about Jesus, the more you learn that he, in some ways, like, I don't know how spicy you get with the language, but he's a badass.
Oh, yeah.
He's a guy who has a ton of courage. His apostles have to have a ton of courage too. He walks right into there are passages in the Bible at this point in the Gospels where they're talking about the chief priests want to arrest him, but they're looking for a way to do it because they're afraid of the crowds. It brings to mind January 6, 2021, when these. All of a sudden, all these riffraff got into the Capitol. Like, oh my goodness, members of the public are on public property during business hours, and how the people who work there, and especially the leaders, the Congress critters, were just terrified. And they were so terrified that nobody got arrested that day. Like, they were looking for a way to do it later when things calmed down, because they were afraid and trying to hide in the moment. So. There's some serious riling up going on here in the temple.
So you're saying Donald Trump is God's son?
Not quite.
I thought he was talking about me because, much like Jesus, I rile people up at like Thanksgiving dinner, And hey, I'm just telling the truth. I don't know why you
Yes.
guys can't handle it.
Yes, that's you are getting in touch with your inner truth, goodness, and beauty, regardless of how people react to you.
So
Yes.
the Pharisees just see this guy as a upstart young competitor to their grift, right? Just upsetting the. I mean, obviously they don't see what's coming, right? They don't
No.
believe that
No.
he's the Son of God. He's just like a problem. He's got a following, and he's a problem. So we need to deal with him somehow.
Yes, he's a problem. They have a following, and what they're going to learn very quickly as they try to confront him over these few days is that Jesus is he's almost not playing the same game they are. Because one of the things that I do when I either writing or teaching or speaking about these things is that I stress to people that if Jesus were basically exactly like the religious leaders, but with maybe a different angle, maybe just from a different political party, quote unquote, they would know what to do with him. Right? As long as he's on the same ball field that they are, playing with the same deck of cards, playing by the same guidelines and with the same aims, they would know what to do with him. But when it becomes apparent that Jesus is playing a different game, they don't know what to do with him. Now it's chaos. And so the only thing at their disposal is, when all you've got is a hammer, everything's a nail, is to persecute this guy. Because once they find out that they can't just go head to head with him logically, verbal sparring, they can't go head to head with him as far as interpreting the law and interpreting the prophets and having everybody just say, oh, yes, our current leaders are all so brilliant and this upstart guy is such a moron. Like, that doesn't really happen. And so the tension comes from the fact that as they try and use the tools at their disposal against Jesus, none of them work. And now what? It's something maybe that we go through as, I'm an anarchist, and you guys are probably pretty close to that as well, if not. And whenever you talk to somebody who's either on the left or on the right, they keep wanting to fit you somewhere on their political spectrum. And if they're on the left and you're not agreeing with them, like, oh, so you're a right winger. And if they're on the right and you're not agreeing with them, oh, so you're some woke left winger. Because they don't know how to deal with someone who's not on their very one-dimensional political spectrum. Now, if you're on their political spectrum, they know what to do. They know exactly what insult to hurl at you if you're on the left and they're on the right, or if they're on the left and you're on the right. Or if you're in the middle, they know, like, oh, you're just trying to play both sides. Why don't you come over this way? But if you're off their spectrum entirely, they don't know what to say.
Yeah, it's
they
like
don't know where to put you, right?
Through both when I would write articles for like LouRockwell.com back in the day, that during the George W. Bush years, some angry people would, not like LRC regulars, but like, others would see it, would write me emails confidently telling me about how I must have supported Bill Clinton and he was a bad guy and stuff. And it's like, no, I didn't support Bill Clinton. And then later when Obama came in, people confidently were, telling me that, oh yeah, I bet you didn't say anything when George Bush was, rendering people to, death camps and whatever. And I was like, I was, so they couldn't conceive that if you're criticizing the current guy, it must be because you're, not from the other party. Do you want to talk, Dominic, about, I think probably the best example of what you're talking about here is when they try to trap him with is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. So, 3 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all record this question that, okay, so you don't like us changing money and running this operation here where people have to come in and travel here and buy our sacrificial offerings from us. And let me bring it up if I could read a little bit of it for people. The best one is probably in Matthew. Then the Pharisees went off and plotted how they might entrap him in speech. They sent their disciples to him with the Herodians. So, the main guys aren't going to him yet. They're still like, hands off. Let's send some of our staffers. So let's send some of the staffers out there to do this. And so they approach and say, Teacher, we know that you are a truthful man and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. So a little flattery going on here. And you are not concerned with anyone's opinion, for you do not regard a person's status. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it lawful to pay the census tax to Caesar or not? Knowing their malice, Jesus said, why are you testing me, you hypocrites? And that word there, you hypocrites, is a key word, because he's identifying them right away as people who are trying to say one thing and do another. Like, they don't believe that he's a truthful man. They don't believe all the flattery they just placed on him. They're just trying to say it to either gain some credence with the crowd or trying to soften Jesus up. So that's the first bit of hypocrisy. Jesus then says, show me the coin that pays the census tax. They hand him the Roman coin. So this is interesting. These guys are in the temple, and one of them's just got a Roman coin on him. Well, why is that? These guys have an alliance, or a friendliness at least, with the Roman authorities already. And so one of them very easily produces a Roman coin. Here you go. And Jesus says, whose image is on this and whose inscription? And they reply, Caesar's. And at that he said to them, then repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God what belongs to God. When they had heard this, they were amazed, and leaving him, they went away. So this was not the answer they were expecting at all. And Jesus is playing a different game. This is almost what's going on now with Bitcoin, and why people want Bitcoin to work not only as an asset, but as money. Because if you can get yourself out of, say, the central bank schemes of money, then, because right now, we pay taxes to Caesar just because Caesar does it without our knowledge. If you work for a company that does tax withholding, Caesar just gets your money regardless. If you buy anything that has sales tax, Caesar gets your money regardless. If you use the currency and they inflate the currency, well, Caesar has now extracted wealth from you regardless. Back then, though, you actually had to hand over your wealth to pay the tax. It wasn't done passively. There are Bitcoin guys now who will say, and maybe this has jumped over more to Monero if you have some more knowledgeable crypto folks in your audience. I am not one of them, but the idea being that if we could develop a money that did not need a central bank, then we could get out of the central bank's corruption and extraction of value from those of us who use the money. And now it couldn't be the excuse like, well, you're using our money, so we get a cut of it. What if you weren't using their money at all? Could you have a good excuse? So that's one element in play in here. The other element in play here, besides that and the fact that the people who go to question Jesus already have somewhat of an alliance with Caesar, so they're not being truthful about where they stand, is that what Jesus says? It's like, okay, you got to use money for some things, and maybe begrudgingly, and maybe it's not fair, but who are you? What are you made for? Is this your life? Do you love this so much that this is your whole life? He's really planting the seed in them as to whom do you belong as a person? I mean, yes, we begrudgingly use money when we have to, but if you don't have to, I've been in businesses before where you can just trade with people product for product. You don't have to use the money, and you still have a respect for the exchange. You still have a respect for the other party you're trading with there. So, there's a lot going on here besides just the punchline of, they tried to do a gotcha with Jesus and Jesus turned it on them.
If I could jump in, and I'm, of course, Adam, I want to hear what your thoughts are too on this, but just to circle back to what you said about how he's not playing their game. And when you're a little kid or something, you hear these stories you don't fully get. And people, I think, jump right to, like, is he saying to pay tax? But just to make sure people get why it was a trap, they didn't care what his answer was, but they assumed he's either got to say yes or no. Or if he's trying to be wishy-washy and dodge the question, so they thought no matter what he does, we've got him. Because if he says yes, pay the tax to Caesar, then the masses who think he's coming in as a revolutionary leader who's going to liberate us from the Roman oppression, they're going to abandon him and say, oh, this guy's a sellout. He's afraid of Rome. If he says don't pay it, then they're just going to go to the Romans and say, hey, he's openly saying don't pay taxes to Caesar. You got to arrest this guy, and they would have. Or, like I said, if he just tries to be wishy-washy and dodge the question, then, look at the chicken won't answer. So no matter what he does, and then what does he do? He says, pay to Caesar what is Caesar's and pay to God's what is God's. That's a tautology. How could anyone argue with that statement? And yet it's not obvious what his actual answer was. And, they're all kind of just dumbfounded. And then like Dominic's saying, he kind of zinged them by making them, almost tricking them. Like, hey, you got a Roman coin on you? And like, oh yeah, right here. Right there, all the like hardcore revolutionaries in the crowd would now not side with those guys because they'd realize, what are you collaborators doing walking around with the Romans' money in your pockets? Mm-hmm. So anyway, like it would be so quick that they probably, like I said, they literally didn't even understand what just happened, and they would be walking away dumbfounded and go back to the guys who sent them and they say, yeah, what happened? And I don't know, but he definitely won that exchange. So.
Yeah, this telling of the story, Jesus is indeed quite a badass. He's outsmarting these people left, right, and center while staying true to, his purpose and his message. I have just a secular question.
Sure.
I mean, I've heard about that story a zillion times, and I've heard it referenced by statists saying, see, Jesus wants you to obey the state. And I've never heard, I shouldn't say never, but like, when did it make the twist in the popular consciousness, at least in America, that this is a passage of the Bible saying, be a good citizen, follow the government, and pay your taxes, and yes, sir, to deliver your children to the military? I mean, when did that switch take place, and how many Christians would you say, as a percentage, view this passage the way you two are presenting it, as opposed to the percentage that means you need to worship Joe Biden and now Trump?
Bob, do you have more history of the U.S. there and when it happened? Because I will go back to pre-U.S. I think this change happened. It was pretty clear that it happened even before European exploration to the New World. It happened in Europe and in other parts of
but way back when, people reading the Bible got it, right? They didn't just miss this whole slick move that he did. I mean,
yeah,
you can't write that story and not get what he's doing there.
There is a question, like, I always say that I'm very thankful that Christianity lasted about 250 to 300 years before somebody in the Roman regime wised up and said, we could just co-opt this. And there came Constantine and the cronies within the church who sided with Constantine. And I think that's where it really happens, is once
they co-opted Taylor Swift, they can co-opt anything.
Yeah, right. Sure, hey, stater's going to state. Right?
That's right.
So,
it happens.
Yeah, I would answer this way, and then obviously, Dominic, see if you disagree with any of this. So, Adam, my sense, I don't know like the exact history, and like, oh, the early church said this, and then Augustine said that. I can't do that kind of stuff. But I think the standard view, people would have thought, oh, what Jesus was saying, it's, you got to have priorities. And like, the really important thing is that you're obedient to God. But then, yeah, you got to pay taxes. I mean, because the government, you need the government, or else how are you going to build the roads? That kind of deal. So now, like, I think Dominic and my more nuanced thing about, there also was an element in there about, well, why are you using the Roman money? I mean, because most people only have one money in terms of, like, certainly in the United States, you know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like your parents and grandparents and blah, blah, blah. They're not considering, well, we could be using competing currencies. They're just not even thinking that. They're just thinking, yeah, the money comes from the government. You got to pay taxes. So whereas there, it was a more nuanced thing about being under a Roman occupation. So it's a little bit tricky. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, what did they think in Vichy, France? Should we pay the marks to the Third Reich or something? I don't know how it would have been viewed there. So I'm saying there's a lot of cultural specific things going on, and when this story unfolded, that would not have translated later on to, like, Americans in the year 1850, where they just would have thought, yeah, you got to pay taxes to the U.S. government, but if the government told you to do something that was clearly immoral, like to say you got to worship Muhammad, you wouldn't do that because God's first. I think that's kind of the way they would do it. So it wasn't so much like a pro-state. Yes, the state's awesome. It was just more like as it says, the things that God, demands you owe to him, and then the stuff, that mundane stuff about paying taxes for government services. Yeah, you got to be a good citizen.
I mean, when I first heard that story, I was a kid, probably teenager, and so I was just thinking, he's saying, well, yeah, go ahead and pay over to this guy whatever the hordes of men in armor and with swords are demanding of you, because otherwise they'll kill you. I mean, I always assumed he was just making the point, you don't have to get killed by a tax collector just to be true to this religion or something like that.
I think another point that's going on in the passage is that he's basically explaining to people that Caesar has a price.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you want an alliance with Caesar? Caesar has a price. You're going to have to pay it. You know, do you want that alliance? Bob, you mentioned Augustine, and I don't have an exact knowledge of this, but Augustine, I think, wrote about the city of God and then sort of the earthly city. So even in the 4th century, Christians are making this kind of separation between heaven and earth. Like, there are things that we do on earth that they make sense on earth, so yes, we should do them, and we have a duty to do them, even if they're not heavenly. So that becomes how government gets justified. It's like, okay, well, yeah, heaven, that's for later. A lot of this, fairness stuff, that's for later. For now, we deal with stuff here. And there becomes sort of a nobility to the state, the grandeur of like you said before, hierarchy. Like, that's just how we are wired as humans. So I think it becomes very easy. I think it's remarkably easy for the incentives surrounding Christianity to be flipped. You know, up until Constantine, to self-identify as Christian, especially if anybody else would find out publicly, was to set yourself up to be an outcast. And so the incentive was that there was something that meant more to you than your social status. There was something that meant more to you than even your, in some regard, your safety, depending on who found out and how strongly they felt against you. Once Constantine and Constantine's buddies within the church hierarchy get together, the incentives completely flip. Now, if you self-identify as a Christian, you get stuff. Now you get greater social status. Now you get more opportunities. Now you may get more riches. Now you are more well liked by people. And if you don't identify as a Christian, well, now you're the outcast. And we see that all through Europe's history for centuries upon centuries. Like, if you had to be Christian in order to be part of society. You had to identify outwardly as Christian to be part of society. So I think that by the time European exploration of the Americas happens, that's all there. Like the Pilgrims, they were not seeking religious freedom when they sailed over here. They were just tired of being the guys who were picked on. They were searching for a place where they could be the big shots.
Yeah.
They sailed over so they could be the big shots.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that,
put
Dominic.
That stylized fish in the yellow pages, so everybody knows who's who and what's what.
That is how, they were not coming over so we could have religious tolerance and everything. I was like, no, we have the right religion. Everyone else is going to hell, and we got to come over here so we can practice the right religion.
So we could be the big shots, and we can enforce on people. Now you've got Salem witch trials and stuff. So it like religious freedom is either a very, very old idea going back to the early church, or it's a very, very new idea with modern tolerance. It's not an idea that was believed or practiced for most of human history in just about anywhere in the world. So through our modern lens, it seems strange, but for most of human history, including most of, sadly, Christendom, as it's called, when Christians took over and became the dominant ordering method for societies throughout Europe, sadly, it's not as unusual as, a few anarchists on a Zoom call in 2025. Yeah, it would seem to us, right?
Just give us time, Dom. Give us time.
Give us time, right?
Yeah. Hey, so I'm looking at the clock here, and I know you do you want to speak about Judas just to make sure we don't have to skip over that quickly?
Sure. There are other.
Do you think he gets a bad rap?
I think Judas is very misunderstood, and not that I'm going to make him out to be a sympathetic figure too much.
He's part of God's plan too, right?
Well, God has what we call a permissive will and and an actual will. So there are things that God wants to happen, and there are things that God allows to happen. And because God gives us free will, the mistakes we make are God allows it because free will is a good enough good that even if we screw it up, it's worth having. Like, for instance, Christians, we have a concept of sin. Sin is a turning away from God. So obviously not everything that happens is God's plan, because then sin could not exist. You know, Bob, you brought up tautology before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you define everything as in accord with God's plan, then nothing can be against God's plan. And if sin is against God's plan, then sin can't exist. So, you know, not everything that happens is God's will, but the fact that God allows us to make decisions, that is God's will. And if we make mistakes, like, God tolerates us. So Judas makes some mistakes here. I don't know that that Judas had to, and I wrote a book called Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen, where I do the thought experiment. Does all this have to happen for God to show humans a better way and redeem our nature? And I would say theoretically no. But control coveting, violent, law and order humans wouldn't let it be any other way. So Judas is scripturally, the Pharisees and the chief priests are already planning to arrest Jesus and get rid of him. They don't need Judas to do that. So when Judas shows up to them trying to arrange a meeting, because Judas is naive. Judas is what I call the good citizen. He's the only good citizen among the apostles. Judas wants Jesus and the chief priests and Pharisees and scribes to get along better, because it will be more lucrative for all of them. Like, stop with so much of the animosity. You guys would be so much better if, you know, you had an arrangement with each other. So Judas is trying to be the middleman here, the broker.
Hey, hang on. Let me just.
Go ahead.
I know we talked about your book. I don't remember this element because I don't even know that this thesis has ever occurred to me. Now, if I go review the tapes and we talked about this, I have a bad memory.
It's in the back.
You're saying you don't think. I'm not challenging you. I just want to clarify. You don't think Judas, when he went to them and said, "Hey, I'm going to point," because the issue is, Adam, they don't know who Jesus is. Like, it's not like they just go look him up as Wikipedia article. You know, they don't know what he looks like. So he's saying, "I'll lead your people there, and I'll go and give him a kiss, so you know who. You know, you can be sure you got the right guy." And then they're going to give him money. And you're saying, Dominic, you think Judas didn't realize what they were going to do with him?
Yes, because once Judas finds out what they're doing with him, Judas is distraught, tries to return the money.
I mean, I knew that. I just thought
Yes.
he realized, what have I done? Like, I didn't realize you thought he meant like, oh, no, I didn't know they were going to do that. I thought they were just going to yell at him.
He's trying to arrange a meeting. Judas wants them to get along.
Okay.
He's the good citizen. The reason why Judas is advantageous to the chief priests in arresting Jesus is because, remember, they keep wanting to arrest Jesus, but whenever he's out in public in the daylight, there's so many supporters around him that they're afraid to do it. So they keep looking for a way to arrest him where they won't have to fight off crowds of their own people who are against them. So Judas.
So they waited until a dude kissed him, and then they arrested him for being gay.
They waited for someone from Jesus' inner circle to say, "I'd like to arrange a meeting." And now the Pharisees go, "Oh, you do? Oh, okay. And when will this be? It won't be a big thing. Just us to talk. Oh, no crowds. Oh, yeah, yes, please arrange this meeting for us. Yes, thank you." And Judas leaves not understanding. Like, when we read the Gospels, we know a lot of things that the apostles did not. Like, we read the Gospels and we read the chief priests and scribes plotted to kill him. They don't quite exactly know that yet in real time. That unfolds for them. So we know, like, we get the narrator telling us that this is what they're going to do. But Judas doesn't know that. So Judas thinks, all right, when the Last Supper happens and Judas is fed up that Jesus is not, being any nicer to the Pharisees, Judas leaves the supper, goes to the Pharisees and said, "Look, he's having a dinner. I'll show you where he is. There's no big crowds. It's already night. Come with me. It's dark, I know. I'll point him out to you. Just bring your guys. And they do it. And, it works out just as Judas said. There were no crowds. He pointed them out, even though it was dark, so they know which one to apprehend. And they did it. And it's not until later that Judas realizes, oh my goodness, they don't want a meeting. They want to arrest this guy and turn him into the worst criminal. And then when Jesus is finally killed, it's like, what? Yeah, Bob, it becomes a what have I done? What have I done? Like, Judas is naive. But the reason why he doesn't get a pass is because he's been trying to get Jesus to fit in with the authorities the whole time. And that, more than anything to Jesus, is a no-go zone. There's another parable. I don't know if either of you heard this, because it has become popular in just secular culture as well. Is the new wine will not fit in the old wineskins.
Mm-hmm.
The new wine in the old wineskins. The way their society is structured, that's the old wineskin. Jesus will not fit. Judas is trying to make it fit. And he's been doing this, kind of plotting it the whole time.
So at what point in the
worse.
story is it that Jesus takes Judas into the rowboat and rows him out to the middle of the lake and has that conversation where he says, I knew it was you the whole... When does that happen?
During the Last Supper, Jesus says, one of you will betray me. And yes, dips his...
Yep, that's it.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, Dom, just to push back a little bit. I mean, so what... Again, I'll just say my piece, and then you can respond. I like the open airing of different views here.
Sure.
I mean, again, Jesus repeatedly told his apostles, I'm going to go up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man's going to, so the scriptures may be fulfilled. I mean, he's telling them they're going to kill me. Mm-hmm. So if you're saying Judas didn't think they were going to kill him, it's not only that he misread them, he thought Jesus is an idiot. And then also, like I said, at the Last Supper, when Jesus says, one of you will betray me, and he says, oh, who? Not me, surely. You're saying he earnestly meant not me, because he's thinking, no, I'm just setting up a sit down with you. I'm not betraying you. What are you talking about?
Yes. See, this is the thing.
You're a good defense lawyer. I like it.
Here you go. It is worse to be anti-Christ than contra Christ. Contra Christ is the honest opponent. Judas
didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, if this narrative is correct.
He may not have. We don't know what's in their minds. It's an unfolding thing for a lot of them. I mean, they still have some doubts even after Jesus rises. They're like, what's going on? But Judas is the imposter. Like, that's what anti means. It doesn't mean against, even though we've used it for that. The Antichrist is the imposter. Judas is sort of the double agent here. So that's why it's a worse betrayal to be the imposter than it is to be the honest opponent. So Judas doesn't realize that he doesn't think what he's doing is betraying. He thinks what he's doing is going to take the best parts of Jesus and the best parts of the state and put them together into this glorious Christian nationalism.
To go back to the Godfather analogy, that actually is because Fredo, in his mind, somehow convinced himself when he went to the other mob boss that he wasn't setting his brother up to get killed.
No,
he just thought, no, Michael, I just trying to help. I was trying to get paid. I'm smart.
Yes.
I can do things. I'm smart. So
Judas is Fredo. Yes. Yeah, he doesn't know what's happening. He is not fully aware of the implications of his actions.
Right, and then Jesus says, "And you believed him?"
Yeah. So yes,
I have another.
Judas gets played like a fiddle by the Pharisees. Like, he just hand delivers Jesus. As these Pharisees are trying to figure out, how are we going to make this arrest in a way that doesn't endanger us? Here comes Judas strolling right into their office.
And he wasn't tipped off when guys with like a whole crowd of guys with clubs and stuff are coming with him. Like, yeah, we're just gonna,
they were dressed
Uber.
They were dressed as waiters.
It's night. We're in Roman occupied territory. We're going to have our temple guards with us. We're going to have our guys with you.
I mean, I guess psychologically, right. What would the devil have to do to you to get you to sell the guy you've seen raise Lazarus from the dead to then for 30 pieces of silver go talk to, I guess who knows what kind of story you'd be telling yourself to get, for your body to go through those motions. So yeah, maybe that is the way that the devil got him to do it.
Yes, going back to even the old myth of the Garden of Eden, evil rarely shows up as obvious violent evil. Evil shows up as a shortcut to order and control. So the way, quote unquote, the devil gets you is by making you think that what you're doing is going to restore order. It's going to bring things under control. It's good. It plays on the primitive psyche. But that path leads to evil because now you start justifying all sorts of things to get there. Now you start justifying imposing on people to get there. Now you start justifying little bits of harm that then become bigger bits of harm on people in order to get there. So yes, the devil that gets into Judas tells him, it's pretty good now, but what's with all this turmoil? What's with all this animosity? Wouldn't it be better if there was less animosity? Judas, you can help make that a reality. Just go to the temple guards, go to the chief priests, and offer to arrange a meeting. You'll be the hero. You'll be
Bob,
the one that brought them together.
It reminds me of a conversation you and I just had recently, Bob, where, talking about game theory and, should you just follow a simple set of rules or should you try to evaluate whether you actually are going to make the world a better place or your own circumstances a better place by stealing the wallet or doing whatever, telling a lie. Mm-hmm. And as Dom's pointing out with this story, the world's an awful complicated place, and you're probably not going to be able to figure out exactly how all the dominoes are going to fall if, when you do disreputable things, immoral things. So it really is a pretty nice, handy heuristic to just do the right thing, even if you don't really understand how complex the world is. Well, we just don't rat out on our friends for 30 pieces of silver. Mm-hmm. So we don't lie and we don't cheat and we don't steal. And that, in general, will be the right course of action in enough of the use cases you're going to come across in these 70 years of your life or whatever, that's probably just the simpler way to live and the better way to live.
It also shows who Judas may still be following the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees. He may still be, very much, I call him the good citizen. He's following them because he goes to the Pharisees to set up the meeting like he's going to surprise Jesus. If Jesus is going to be like, oh, what a great thing you've done by bringing us here. Or maybe he's going to say, Jesus is going to say, well, I wasn't going to do this myself, but now that you've brought us together, sure, let's sit down and talk. Because Judas has seen Jesus meet with all sorts of people before who don't necessarily agree with Jesus. Mm-hmm. He's seen this before. He's seen Jesus dine with Pharisees in their homes. He's seen them dine with tax collectors and sinners. He has seen Jesus not necessarily shun people before. So for Judas, it's like, things would be better if we got together and could work something out. I'm going to make that happen.
Can I ask Dom, did you read someone else with that theory, or is that your own? And I'm not saying that like accuse it in an accusing way. I'm just literally asking you.
I did not read that explicitly, but it's just going through the gospel passage of how Judas acts up to that point, and then how he acts when he realizes what has happened. I mean, it's not like pro wrestling where, the Pharisees come out and kill Jesus and Judas rips off the mask. It's like Judas rips off the mask like, oh, Judas was on their side all along. Like Judas is conflicted here. He was trying to play both sides, and he wound up playing for neither side in the end.
I mean, for example, Dante places Judas like in the lowest level of hell, like the worst punishment conceivable is like Judas is the worst person who's ever lived as far as Dante is concerned. So Is that consistent with your view? And you're saying, yes, that the devil can trick you into doing the worst thing in human history with this technique? Or you think, no, Dante and I are disagreed. Like Dante really thinks he utterly betrayed Jesus, even like he knew full well he was turning him over to his death at that point, and he didn't care because he was mad about Jesus let that lady like wash his feet with the perfume. And so, there were a few occasions leading up to this where it's clear Judas doesn't like what's going on.
Yeah, Judas has, but it's clear that there are other apostles who are confused or disagreeable. Also, it's not as if Judas is the only one.
Right.
Philip gets a bad rap at the Last Supper too. At one point Jesus says, "Philip, you've been with me for 3 years and you still don't understand this." Peter on and off through the Gospels.
He called Peter Satan.
Right. At one point, right after naming him the first pope.
Right.
He calls him Satan. And I've made the point before that God chooses Judas to show us that even insiders can be very, very wrong. Like even bishops can be wrong. Judas is a bishop, just like the other apostles. Like even the highest ranking clergy can be wrong about things. I think a better question would be for Dante is, Dante, how are you so sure that Judas plotted this from the beginning to be just this 100% ultimate betrayal who would wind up in the depths of hell? Because I think if you read the Gospels, Judas gets played. He's trying to play both sides, and in the end, he gets played, and he's distraught. Like the Gospels describe Judas as being very, very sad about what happens. Like this is not how he envisioned it. This was not Judas's expectation for how things could go down. Now that does not excuse Judas, because again, I think in Christianity, the worst thing you can do is try and turn Jesus into something else for some other purposes. So I think that's true. But like Adam, you were saying before, there's this notion in modern Western Christianity where the state and the church, they get along fine. You can be totally statist and be a good Christian. I think that's something that the Gospels would have a problem with, and that the early church who wrote the Gospels would have a problem with. Because
my man, I very much like your interpretation.
And I think that's what happens. I think the history here is of the history in this week that Christians celebrate as Holy Week leading up to Easter is a lot of there's some gamesmanship going on, and there's some people who think they're doing the right thing in their minds, who it turns out that they have the wrong motives the whole time, and the outcomes are going to be even things that they hadn't imagined. And like you were saying before, the complexity, Adam, it's too much. Like Judas doesn't realize the complexity of what he's doing, but he still should have known better than to be an imposter. He still should have known better than to go behind Jesus's back. He still should have known better to think that he knew what was best for Jesus and for the rest of them. Like he still should have known better. He still should have been more genuine with Jesus and with his friends that he had traveled with. He still should have been more honest to them about what he was thinking. So even though Judas, it's not clear at all that Judas wants Jesus killed and imprisoned and tortured, even up to the end. Even though it's not clear that Judas intended for that to happen, Judas did intend to sneak around and to be underhanded.
The Fredo analogy, like Adam was saying. Yeah.
It is. Like Judas did intend to do that, and he intended to do it in a way that would turn Jesus into something that Jesus was not supposed to be. That's the worst thing you can be, is not someone who opposes Christianity. The worst thing you can be is someone who tries to twist and turn Christianity into something else because you really value that other thing more, and just want to use Christianity and use the Christian language and co-opt maybe the popularity and the imagery and the history for yourself. The Antichrist is worse than the Contra Christ.
Very persuasively
notice,
stated.
Tom Woods and I had the show Contra Krugman because we were at least being honest. We weren't, trying to.
You weren't anti-Krugman. You weren't like telling Paul Krugman, "Oh yeah, we love you," and then going on the podcast and like being like, "Oh," you weren't double agents. You were just honest.
We weren't telling the mess. If you really want to boost aggregate demand, why don't you consider buying Rothbard books? And that will.
Yes, I first heard of you, Bob, through Contra Krugman. Yes, so I like that. Yes.
So I want to be mindful of your time, gentlemen. Dominic, is there anything else you think we should know for this episode? And include in your remarks, please, your Substack, any places that you want to direct people to hear more of your illuminating thoughts?
Oh, well, thank you. I do write regularly and podcast regularly at Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen on Substack. So look for me there. It's the same title as my book, Good Neighbor, Bad Citizen, which each of you were kind enough to review on your podcast with me. I thank you very much for those. I still get every now and then people referencing one of you because I appeared on your shows and got to talk with you gentlemen. So you can go there to find me on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Lulu for the book, Substack for the weekly writings and weekly solo podcasting that I do called the Sunday Buffet. Find me there. I am on X, but I'm not popular enough on X for it to matter. But I am there. I have not reached nearly the levels that you two have over on X, but I am there lurking every now and then.
I'm barely there as well, but Bob is a warrior.
Thank you, sir. Can I ask you a real quick one, Doc?
Sure.
How do you feel about Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ? Do you think that's a good movie for, certainly Catholics, but Christians in general, or do you have misgivings?
I don't have misgivings about it. I think it's a good movie in the sense that it does what you were talking about, Bob, that when you're a kid, you get this idea that Jesus is a nice guy and maybe that the whole society is really nice and that, how did these things happen? And you almost don't question it.
Mm-hmm.
I think Mel Gibson's movie, more than anything, tries to make what happened to Jesus more real to people. Like, oh, this is what life was like back then. Mm-hmm. And this was not some easy thing. Like, he got the heck beat out of him. There were screaming mobs who hated them. I think, and especially the big screen treatment of it, it kind of almost puts you there.
Yeah.
Like you can feel the energy. If you've ever been in a crowd and just done what the crowd was doing, you can almost sense that from the way Mel Gibson made the film. And it is a brutal film because that's what this was. I mean, the Romans were trying to be cruel. This was something that they reserved for their occupied territories because it was so cruel. You wouldn't do this to a full-fledged Roman citizen, but to one of those losers that you were occupying in some other territory, sure, yeah, crucify him.
Yeah.
Torture
make an example to the rest of the people, like, hey, keep your head down.
Yeah, but that's why they make him carry his cross. It's a parade. Mm-hmm. Like, this was supposed to be public. Other people were supposed to see it. This wasn't like a private, well, we'll just mete out your punishment. This was supposed to be a spectacle. It was supposed to be very painful. It was supposed to be painful for Jesus. It was supposed to be painful for people to watch who sympathized with him. It was supposed to be easy to turn on Jesus and say, yeah, if this is happening to him, like on a visceral level, say, oh, he must have done something wrong. I don't want to do that. I'm not with that guy.
Yeah.
Like, even his closest friends do that. They Peter backs away and says, I don't know who that guy is. Right? They all run away at some point, except for John kind of sneaks back for the way of the cross and the crucifixion, but nobody stands up very vocally for Jesus. So, I mean, everything that the Romans do that Mel Gibson depicts there is so brutal and harsh. It works. Like, they wouldn't do it so often if it worked. If it didn't work, like, it works.
All right.
It has the effect.
Dominic Scarcella in favor of crucifixion. Okay.
Bob, I recognize the utility.
Bob, do you have anything else?
I am against all violence and all statism.
All right. Duly noted.
I think I fit in well with you two. I think we are in agreement that we recognize that, like the three of us, we understand why people like government, right? But at the same time, we don't like government. But we understand why someone would find that imposed order attractive. We understand why some people would find hierarchy attractive, even if it is imposed. We understand why people would find a mechanism that bestows status on people who comply, why that would be attractive, why external validation is attractive. So the three of us understand why these things happen and why they quote unquote work on many people. But at the same time, we evaluate them and analyze them and say, No, there's got to be a better way, whether it's because you're explicitly Christian or because you're simply a person who has explored virtue and human dignity, even without the Christian metaphysics involved in it. That we just understand there's got to be something better than that.
Well said
Yeah,
again.
I'm on board with that. So thanks, guys. Yeah, just in closing for me, thanks everybody for tuning in. I really enjoyed this conversation, guys, and I'm gonna have to think more about Judas. I was joking when I said to get a bad rap, and then you kind of made a case that he did. It's interesting.
We're here to turn rocks over and see what's underneath them. Thank you, Dominic Scarcella, for joining us. If you're listening to this on Heyman Nature or watching this on the YouTube, please go check out the Bob Murphy Show, bobmurphyshow.com. And if it's the other way around, please check out my YouTube at Heyman Nature, Haman, or check out my Substack where I write. And my partner Tyrone and I put out bonus content. That's heymannature.substack.com. Thanks again, Bob, Dom. This is Adam Heyman. We'll catch you next time.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.